You call that a real job? Vivian's shrill voice cut through the tense silence at the dinner table like a knife. I flinched, my fork clattering against the plate. My mother-in-law's beady eyes bored into me, her thin lips curled in disdain. Wasting your days playing around with colors and shapes on a computer. How avant-garde. Across the table, Eli kept his head down, avoiding my pleading gaze. I opened my mouth to respond, but Vivian barreled on, her voice dripping with contempt. I don't know why I even let you stay under my roof. At least Eli made an honest living with his finance job before. She trailed off, though the implication hung heavy in the air. Ever since Eli's unexpected layoff and our move into her home, Vivian had wasted no opportunity to demean my career as a freelance graphic designer. "Mom, that's enough," Eli muttered, but lacked the conviction to meet her glare. Hot shame burned my cheeks as unwanted memories resurfaced. The endless job searches culminating in rejections for roles I was overqualified for. The forced smiles as I explained my unconventional career to friends and relatives, their skepticism thinly veiled. But this was a new low, having my passion, my art, denigrated as a silly indulgence within my own home, by my own family. I swallowed hard, my appetite extinguished. I may not bring in the income your precious Eli once did, but my work is still valid. I take pride in it. Vivian barked a humorless laugh. Pride? In scribbling doodles like a child? Her scornful gaze raked over me, cold with dismissal. I expected better for my son's wife. You're nothing but a disappointment, just like... The shrill ring of the kitchen timer mercifully cut her off. Vivian pushed back her chair with a huff. Well, I'd better check on those pies. We certainly can't have those getting overcooked, unlike some people's ambitions in this house. As she bustled away, an uneasy silence fell over the dining room. I caught Eli's eye, desperate for solidarity, for defense against his mother's relentless belittling. But he just gave a small shrug and dropped his gaze, polishing off his plate. The message was clear. He wouldn't risk crossing Vivian, not while we relied on her hospitality. Clenching my fists until my nails dug crescents into my palms, I fought the hot sting of tears. Our situation was temporary, a difficult but necessary path to get back on our feet after Eli's job loss. At least that's what I'd told myself when we accepted Vivian's offer to move in. How long could we endure her toxic presence? I wondered, my dream career already withering under her disdain. As Vivian's barbed laughter echoed from the kitchen, a leaden knot formed in my chest. This was no home, it was a battlefield, and I was shaping up to be the first casualty. The following week, a new domestic routine took hold that made Vivian's true intentions abundantly clear. "You'd better get started on those dishes, dear," she said in a sugary sweet tone after clearing the breakfast plates. "And don't forget to wipe down the counters. We don't want any unsightly stains." I frowned at the rapidly growing pile in the sink, but dutifully began scrubbing away the remnants of Eli and Vivian's hearty country breakfast. Eggs, bacon, the works. My own meal had been a simple bowl of oatmeal, per Vivian's instructions. "Can't have you packing on any unnecessary pounds," she had tittered, patting my arm in mock concern. "Wouldn't want my Eli to regret his choice in wives now, would we?" By the time I drained the sink, Vivian had already vanished to run her other endless errands and chores, leaving me alone to clean the kitchen to her exacting standards. The same went for the bathrooms, the laundry, dusting every nook and cranny until the house gleamed. "You should be grateful I'm keeping you busy," she said when I dared to protest the relentless workload one evening, "with your unconventional career situation." Her meaning was clear. By her reckoning, I was little more than a freeloader without my real job to occupy me. The chores were her way of justifying my presence under her roof. Eli did his part, at least, diligently searching and applying for any finance opening that matched his experience. But his disillusionment after being cast aside by his former employer was palpable. When he trudged home night after night, head bowed in defeat from another fruitless round of interviews, it was Vivian who offered comfort and pep talks. Her cloying reassurances that he had simply gotten unlucky slowly dissolved his self-confidence while driving a wedge between us. "Poor Eli," she cooed, while I scrubbed furiously at a stubborn scorch mark on the stove. It must be so humiliating, having to rely on his dear old mother while his wife contributes nothing to the household. Gritting my teeth, I refused to meet her sly, taunting gaze. I knew full well what her game was, isolating me, chipping away at my self-worth and marriage until I was made to feel like an utter burden. She had taken full advantage of our circumstances, wielding her temporary generosity like a vice to crack me from her son's life. Once shattered, he would have no choice but to turn fully to her for support and approval. The realization struck like a dousing of ice water. My own mother-in-law, scheming against me with ruthless determination. How many of Eli's past relationships had crumbled under her manipulations? No more, I vowed silently, wringing the tattered dish rag between white-knuckled fists. Vivian wanted a war of attrition? She was going to get one. When Eli trudged in that evening, I met him at the door with a grim smile. "We need to talk, in private." His brow furrowed at my tone, but I was done playing Vivian's gamekeeper's prisoner. If she wanted to fight for her son's soul, I would match her fury with a cunning all my own. No more Mrs. Nice daughter-in-law. Over the next few weeks, Vivian's campaign of emotional sabotage kicked into high gear. Not a day went by without some snide remark or underhanded slight designed to reinforce my worthlessness. "Don't you ever get tired of staring at that computer screen all day, dear?" she sneered while I typed away at a logo commission one afternoon. So cosmically unfulfilling. I grit my teeth, refusing to rise to her bait. The client's deposit money was a lifeline in our strained financial situation, one Vivian constantly held over my head. "I'm just worried for your mental health, cooped up in here with no real purpose," she continued with a derisive cluck. "What kind of life is that for a bright young woman?" Thankfully, Eli was out pounding the pavement at another round of fruitless interviews. I wasn't eager to suffer Vivian's harangues with an audience. However, when a promising graphic design opportunity did arise requiring me to attend meetings, she was lying in wait. "You're not seriously considering leaving the house looking like that?" Vivian's shrill voice lashed out as I hurried down the hall, my nicest blouse and slacks neatly pressed. I pulled up short, fingers tightening around the portfolio case. "Meaning what exactly?" "Well, just look at you." She raked a critical gaze over my appearance. "Wrinkled, frumpy, with coin-sized bags under your eyes from hyperventilating over those silly doodles all night." Scalding humiliation burned my cheeks as her words struck home. Between the endless chores and desperate need to prove myself with design gigs, I admittedly hadn't paid much attention to my appearance beyond basic grooming. Vivian's bony arms crossed over her chest, lips pursed in exaggerated disgust. "Is that really the image you want to present to potential employers, dear? They'll smell your slobbery desperation from a mile away. Do us all a favor and spare yourself the embarrassment." The words sliced like a barbed whip, stealing my breath. I clutched the portfolio tighter, blinking back enraged tears as she savored her dominance. I knew playing into her manipulation was exactly what she wanted. But excavating the tattered remnants of my self-confidence proved futile against her relentless torrent of derision. In the end, I canceled the meeting and all future design inquiries, feigning some invented excuse about needing to prioritize the family. Vivian's shark-like smile that evening said it all. Another tendril of my identity brutally pruned in her crusade of subjugation. I was gradually being hollowed out from the inside, hollowed out from the vibrant, passionate woman Eli had fallen for. He remained oblivious, of course, lost in his own dejected fog of unemployment. The few times I tentatively aired my growing resentment of his mother, he just averted his gaze, murmuring some vague reassurance that she ultimately meant well. On the rare nights we connected intimately, I could sense his arousal waning along with his respect for me. Who was I becoming under Vivian's influence? Just another outmatched foe, cowed and depleted by her twisted convictions until only a shell remained? No, some faint flicker of defiance raged from deep within. I wouldn't go down without a fight. Vivian wanted a monster of her own making. She was about to get one. Jaw set, I holed away on the computer, scouring for any digital fingerprints that could expose Vivian's machinations to Eli and the rest of the family. The first counterattack was coming. If she thought she could grind my spirit into submission, she had drastically underestimated my resolve. It was time to go nuclear on the battlefield she created. No more games. No more hollow smiles, masking seething hatred. All-out martial war was about to commence under her very roof. For weeks, I scoured every corner of the house and internet for clues about Vivian's motivations, burning the midnight oil on the computer long after she'd gone to bed. I cross-referenced public records, newspaper archives, social media profiles, anything that could expose her twisted agenda. Finally, the pieces began to fall into place. Pages of printed evidence stared back at me, damning in its comprehensiveness. "Everything okay, dear?" Vivian's sugary voice sliced through my concentration. I quickly minimized the browser window as she poked her head into the cramped home office. "You've seemed so preoccupied lately." "Just working," I mumbled, avoiding her prying gaze. "Keeping myself busy with some design projects." "How industrious." Her bony fingers stroked my shoulder, feigning motherly concern. "But you know, obsessing over those little drawings won't undo the past." I tensed at her words, wondering if she was baiting me. "Like Eli's failed relationships before you." There it was, the barb I'd been anticipating, laced with carefully calculated venom. I slowly pivoted to face her. "What are you suggesting?" Vivian's cold eyes glinted with cruel amusement. "Come now, you're not that dull. Even you must have noticed the pattern emerging." She squeaked loudly, shaking her head in feigned disappointment. "A spate of bright young women in Eli's life, full of promise and prospects. Until gradually, they start drifting away, becoming unmotivated, unambitious, resentful even." My blood turned to ice as she laid out the sickening implications. "Those poor girls simply didn't have the mental fortitude to be part of our family, to take on the duties required of an Elliot matriarch. They broke under the strain, or was it something else that broke them?" Reflexively, I curled my hands into fists to mask their trembling. "If you're insinuating what I think you are, I'm simply connecting the dots, dear." Vivian clucked her tongue again, as if chastising a petulant child. "Face facts, you're following the same inescapable trajectory as the others. Your professional situation is merely a precipitating factor, not the root cause." Her skeletal finger wagged in my face as she savored dragging out the reveal. "I did what I had to in order to preserve my son's future prospects, to protect him from diminishing attachments that would only wither his potential." The words spilled out in a sickening rush, past relationships poisoned through steady emotional attrition. Financial entrapment, isolation, relentless needling until the woman's self-worth splintered. All orchestrated by Vivian in a coldly premeditated campaign of subjugation. You monster!" I choked out, struggling not to retch. "How could you do that to Eli, to your own son?" "I did it for Eli," she snapped, that familiar flash of contempt hardening her features. "To spare him the heartbreak of making the wrong choice and resigning himself to mediocrity. A mother's love can be cruel at times, but at least I had his best interests at heart." Her serpentine tongue flicked out to moisten her pursed lips. "This time will be no different, I'm afraid. For his own good, you simply have to go." With a final vindicated smirk, Vivian slithered from the room, leaving me to absorb the full, monstrous truth alone. Gripping the computer desk to steady my shaking limbs, I could no longer deny the depravity unfolding in slow motion around me. My mother-in-law wasn't just a manipulative harpy. She was a calculated, silver-tongued sociopath, systematically undermining my identity to its very core. All in the name of keeping her claws firmly latched into Eli's soul, molding his destiny to fit her twisted, narrow convictions. Anyone who threatened that control was simply another target to be crushed and discarded. White-hot rage seared through my shock, tempering into grim determination. If Vivian thought she could cow me into submission like her past victims, she had sorely underestimated this particular adversary. With a trembling hand, I reopened the research files, pages of tawdry deceptions meticulously logged, her own smug digital fingerprints preserved in sickening detail. I wouldn't just confront this sadistic harridan. I would dismantle her respectable facade, blow by agonizing blow until nothing remained but the gnarled, bitter husk she truly was. The game was on. This time, Vivian was going to learn just what kind of monster she'd created. After Vivian's chilling confession, I knew I had to act fast before her toxic influence metastasized any further. Gathering up the incriminating evidence I'd compiled, I made a silent vow. One way or another, this torment would soon be over. The first step was recruiting an ally on the inside. While Eli remained disturbingly blind to his mother's machinations, his father Nathan had increasingly picked up on the strain she was inflicting. One evening, after another tension-filled family dinner, I caught him alone in the den while Vivian was preoccupied with dishes. "We need to talk," I murmured under my breath, gesturing for him to follow me into the hallway. Nathan's brow furrowed with concern, but he complied without a word. "I can't take much more of this," I confessed in a hoarse whisper once we were out of earshot. Vivian's muffled humming from the kitchen made the hair prickle on my neck. "You know what she's been doing to me, don't you?" Nathan's haggard expression made it clear the truth wasn't lost on him. With a reluctant sigh, he gave a solemn nod. "You're not the first to suffer her special attention. It's a miracle Eli and I have stayed sane all these years." My hands trembled as I clutched the file, forcing the words out in a ragged rush. "It's even worse than we thought. She confessed to sabotaging Eli's previous relationships on purpose. Everyone who got close to him, she was systematically destroying them out of some sick, twisted obligation." A muscle twitched in Nathan's weathered jaw as he absorbed my words. For a long moment, he could only stare at me in stunned silence. "I had my suspicions," he finally rasped, scrubbing a hand over his face. "But to have it confirmed like this—" He shook his head in a slow, mournful arc before squaring his shoulders with newfound resolution. "No more. This has gone on for far too long." Reaching out to grasp my arm, Nathan gave it a reassuring squeeze, his eyes boring into mine with surprising urgency. "You get yourself out of here, you hear? Get somewhere safe while I figure out how to deal with the old bat for good." "But Eli—" I started to protest. "Leave my son to me." He cut me off with gruff insistence. "He's been too deep in her trance for too damn long. I'll make him understand what kind of vile creature he's been defending." A tense silence stretched between us, punctuated by the faint clink of dishware from the kitchen. "Be ready to expose all this at the next family gathering," Nathan continued in a low rasp. "Air out all her skeletons for everyone to see. It's long past time they knew the truth about their matriarch." I could only nod, a surge of gratitude temporarily rendering me speechless. At last, I had an ally willing to stand up to Vivian's tyranny. For now, start making your escape plans. Get yourself sorted with a safe place to land. His brow furrowed as a new thought occurred to him. "And whatever you do, don't tip off that you're onto her schemes. The less she suspects, the better our advantage." My heart hammered as the magnitude of the situation crystallized. This was it. The endgame against Vivian's poisonous influence was finally being set into motion. Tucking the file securely under my arm, I gave a determined nod. "Consider it done. No more skulking in the shadows, letting that wretched succubus grind me down piece by piece." A flicker of approval ghosted across Nathan's stern features. "Attaway. Remember, whatever bridges you have to burn on your way out, it'll be worth it. Just watch your back until it's time to strike." With a final grim nod of understanding, we separated, the first shots having been fired in the looming confrontation to dismantle Vivian's toxic dynasty once and for all. Steeling my nerves, I turned towards plotting out the footwork for my escape. The old crone wanted an adversary worthy of her cruelty. She was about to get her deepest, darkest wish. The next few weeks were an agonizing exercise in subterfuge as Nathan and I laid the groundwork for our offensive against Vivian, keeping my hatred simmering under icy control while she continued her insidious manipulations was a Herculean effort. "Dear, you're looking peaky," Vivian crooned with mock concern one afternoon, eyeing my taut expression over her teacup. "I do hope you're not letting stress over your career troubles get the better of you." My fingernails dug into my palms as I fought back the torrent of vile retorts. So smug, so utterly self-assured that her twisted convictions granted carte blanche to emotionally eviscerate anyone who crossed her path. Mercifully, the weekend of the biannual Elliott family reunion finally arrived, providing the perfect stage to execute our long-awaited strike. While Vivian preened about playing the dutiful hostess, I quietly assembled the comprehensive evidence files Nathan and I had compiled. "Everything's in place," Nathan murmured under his breath as we made final preparations. Dozens of relatives began filtering into the spacious backyard, drawn by Vivian's empty promises of bonhomie. "You sure you're ready to go through with this?" I inhaled deeply, fueling my nerves against the coming onslaught. "More than ready," It's long past time that wretched phony was unmasked for everybody to see. No more games, no more hollow facades of civility. This was about to get brutally, ruinously real. As the afternoon dragged on, I maintained a calculated poker face, watching Vivian flit from group to group with her signature plastic smile. The utter audacity of her public performance after admitting her monstrousness made my skin crawl. "If I could have everyone's attention," she finally called out in a saccharine lilt, waving a simpering hand for silence. "I just wanted to take a moment to welcome you all, the Elliott family homestead, and—" The droning of her false platitudes tuned out as I caught Nathan's terse nod beside me. Showtime. Striding forward with the file cradled against my chest, I shoved my way into the center of the patio, fixing Vivian with a look of undisguised revulsion. A startled hush washed over the gathering as all eyes turned toward us. "That's enough of your grotesque pantomime, you wretched soulless harpy," I spat, every pent-up syllable simmering with palpable venom. "We're all quite familiar with what a despicable, manipulative monster you truly are." Vivian's staged smile curdled into a look of apoplectic rage. "How dare you?" "No, how dare you?" I shot back, unshakably coldly. "How dare you present this facade of genteel hospitality after all the lives you've mercilessly worked to unravel over the years?" With a deft hand, I cracked open the file and began coldly reciting the highlights from Vivian's documented trail of cruelty. The financial constraints, the cruel taunts, the systematic dismantling of her victim's sense of self-worth. A chorus of horrified gasps and muttering echoed around the patio as one ugly truth after another poured out. "You did this to me," I declared, glaring at her with undisguised loathing. "You did this to all those girls unlucky enough to catch your precious Eli's heart before me. Anything at all, to keep your son under your dominion like some sort of deranged, emotional succubus." The word hung heavy over the patio, weighted with grotesque implication. Vivian, to her credit, had descended into sputtering, incoherent rage. "Monstrous lies," she finally shrieked, stabbing a clawed finger in my direction. "Everything I've done has been to preserve the integrity of this family, to keep us from being polluted by grasping, unworthy leeches like this spiteful harridan." I leveled an icy glare, feeding off the horrified energy rippling through the gathered Elliots. "You can drop the martyr act now, Vivian. We have testament after testament thoroughly documenting your toxic, sociopathic crusade to undermine anyone foolish enough to love your son." I let the damning file drop at her feet in revulsion. "You're an emotional terrorist, plain and simple, and you've been exposed to everyone here for the festering, irredeemable cancer you are." Vivian visibly wilted under the weight of silent condemnation from the surrounding family. One by one, the circle tightened around her, driving the twisted matriarch into a corner like the rabid animal she was. "Get out!" A gruff, furious voice cut through the tension. Nathan, finally free from her web, stalked forward with unvarnished loathing twisting his features. "Get out of my house, you miserable succubus. Your reign of terror is over." In that moment, the indomitable Vivian Elliott shriveled into a pitiable, broken creature. The rank stench of her malignance finally laid bare for all to behold. Satisfaction sang through my veins as I turned to watch her slinking, shunned and disgraced out into the lonely night. My own personal demon had finally been exorcised, and the future, while still shrouded in lingering hurt, finally shone with a glimmer of hope for redemption at last. The days following Vivian's brutal exposure at the family reunion were a maelstrom of turmoil. The Elliott clan, so accustomed to putting on airs of unity and decorum, had been irrevocably fractured by the truth about their matriarch's depravity. Entire branches of the family tree followed Vivian into exile, stubbornly clinging to her perfidious lies out of misplaced loyalty or sheer inability to accept her monstrous actions. Sister turned against brother, cousin against cousin, as age-old allegiances combusted into acrimonious infighting. Through it all, a hollow-eyed Eli could only watch in numb disbelief as the bedrock of his existence crumbled to ruin. For so long, he had been under his mother's diabolic spell, his sense of identity and priorities hopelessly warped to serve her pathological needs. I never truly saw her for what she was," he murmured one evening in a voice leached of all emotion. "How could I have been so blind?" We sat together on the back patio steps, the chilly night air lending a funereal pall. I reached over, clasping his hand in silent solidarity. "Your devotion as a son isn't something to censure yourself over," I said softly. "Vivian's skill as a master manipulator is what blinded you to her true nature for so long." Eli dragged in a ragged breath, squeezing his eyes shut as memories undoubtedly flooded back. The endless criticisms, the insidious needling against every relationship, that relentless push to surrender his individuality. "She really did think she was protecting me, didn't she?" he said at last, anguish clouding his features. "In that sick, twisted way of hers, she deluded herself into believing I needed her. Tough love to grow into the man she envisioned." My throat tightened at the naked vulnerability in his voice. For years, Vivian had stripped away his sense of self-worth and autonomy, leaving behind an emotional husk devoid of anything but codependent obedience to her narcissistic whims. "I'm so sorry, Eli," I whispered, feeling the sting of tears, "for not seeing it sooner, for ever letting her get her claws into us like that." His answering look was harrowed but clear. "Don't apologize, not for a second. She's the one who has to live with being a goddamn monster." A terse nod punctuated his words. For the first time I could remember, Eli carried the spark of unflinching resolution in his gaze. The spell was broken, Vivian's influence reduced to so much wasteful toxin being finally purged. Perhaps sensing this pivotal shift, Nathan quietly emerged onto the patio, a haggard older man suddenly freed of decades of emotional shackles. He moved to stand beside us in solemn solidarity. "So it's done then," he murmured in a gravelly tone. "The Dowager demon has been cast into the pit at long last." Eli gave a hollow nod, squeezing my hand tighter as Nathan settled onto the step beside us with bone-weary resignation. "It will take some recalibrating," he continued somberly. "For all of us, but most of all you, son. She didn't just undermine your partners, she systematically stripped you of any sense of self beyond her ambitions. Rebuilding that identity, overcoming those conditioned insecurities, it'll be a daily battle for a while yet." Silence hung heavy between them as the weight of Vivian's psychic toll sank in. So much damage inflicted, so much work ahead to heal the grievous, indelible scars. But her reign of terror was finally, mercifully over. "We'll get through it," I vowed resolutely, clutching Eli's hand with renewed determination. "Both of us, together this time. That cancerous influence is gone for good." A flicker of gratitude warmed Nathan's gruff features as he regarded me. "I have no doubt you will. A burden's been lifted we didn't even realize we were carrying all these years." Rising to his feet with an inscrutable glance towards the house's flickering lights, he cleared his throat. "Whenever you two are ready to start fresh, well, you've got a hell of a lot of personal healing ahead, but at least that path is clear now." Summoning a rueful chuckle, he briefly rested a hand on Eli's shoulder as he moved to retreat back inside. "Take all the time you need, son. That twisted karma has finally unwound. Now it's just a matter of finding which path leads away from its ruins." The night breeze whispered across the yard, carrying whispers of possibility for the reclaimed future suddenly laid bare before us. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself a tentative breath of hope. Vivian was gone, exorcised. Now the true revival could finally begin. The months following our escape from Vivian's toxic web were an arduous journey of healing and rediscovery. Eli, in particular, fought to remake his sense of identity, to untangle decades of conditioning that had molded him into a hopelessly codependent extension of his mother's malignant narcissism. There were setbacks, of course, nights when the old insecurities would flare up, driving him into brooding funks until I managed to coax him back from that familiar abyss of self-doubt. Her spectral influence lingered like a cancerous remnant, poisoning his confidence at the most inopportune times. But we persevered, leaning on one another through the darkness. I refused to let Vivian's legacy consume us, no matter how viciously and stubbornly it clung to the roots of our relationship. Soon enough, my own artistic passions reignited in the wake of that toxic drought. Commissions and graphic design gigs steadily poured in, each completed piece chipping away at the rubble that Hag had strewn across my self-worth. "You're really starting to hit your stride," Eli murmured one evening, studying my latest logo mock-up with a contemplative gaze. "This work, it's undeniably brilliant, Marla, No vile opinions can refute that truth anymore. The unveiled sincerity in his voice washed over me like a soothing balm for the old, barely healed wounds. Gone was the meek, beaten-down husk of a man who had meekly abdicated his identity to Vivian's depraved whims. This Eli was revitalized, newly confident in voicing his convictions, without the looming fear of displeasing his manipulative parent. Free to be his own person at long last. Even Nathan, cordoned off in his separate home across town, exhibited remarkable strides in shaking off Vivian's corrosive influence. Some evenings he would stop by unannounced, hell-bent on reconnecting through the simple joys of family he had been deprived of for decades. "So this is what an Elliott matriarch should truly be," he rumbled approvingly as I dished up plates of homemade chicken parmesan, his first taste of my cooking in years. One whose passion centers around bringing people together rather than, well, you know. Eli and I exchanged a loaded look, both of us intimately aware of just what kind of matriarch Vivian had been. The kind whose legacy we were both still working to extract from our psyches. "It's a work in progress," I said with a tight smile. "But that's a good problem to have, building something nurturing out of the rubble she left behind." "Amen to that," Nathan replied gruffly, tucking into his meal with gusto. Occasionally he would grunt an appreciative nod between hefty bites, as if committing every tender, zesty forkful to memory. Simple family moments like this were no longer to be taken for granted, not after Vivian had deprived the Elliott clan of genuine intimacy and trust for far too long. Over time, Eli's professional life also righted itself in Vivian's absence. A promising financial advising position opened up, and to my immense pride, he attacked the opportunity with a boldness and dynamism that had been sorely lacking under his mother's oppression. "They'd be damned fools not to scoop you up immediately," I murmured as he prepped for the final round of interviews in his characteristic tailored suit. "Vivian's poison is expunged. Now they'll get to see you exactly for who you are." He grinned, that old self-assured charisma rekindled in his eyes as he reached over to squeeze my hands. "And who, pray tell, is that?" he asked with an arched brow. "A strong, ethical man who won't neglect his convictions or family," I shot back, matching his rakish look. "The kind of person I should have been able to see all those years ago, before that decrepit succubus warped your identity beyond recognition." His grin widened into an expression of unvarnished joy and love, the old scars finally mended enough to let happiness pour forth undeterred. Leaning in, he claimed my lips in a fiery, passionate embrace, one sealed after years of toxicity, despair, and harrowing conflict. We had both been forged anew from the smelter of Vivian's cruelty. Hardened, certainly, but undeterred in our quest to neutralize her lingering influences once and for all. When Eli landed the position a week later, we celebrated with a toast not just to his achievement, but to our collective rise from the ashes of that miserable psychopath's machinations. A new life, a new world of opportunity beckoned, one finally free from the crushing weight of that demented matriarch's control. The morning saga ended with Eli and I arm in arm at one of my own gallery openings nearly a year later, beatifically expectant with our first child as the ultimate repudiation of Vivian's derangement. Around us, a teeming crowd of colleagues, friends, and family congregated to celebrate my ascendant artistic achievements, solemnly reveling in the hard-won victories we had each carved from the rubble of past trauma. In that electrifying moment of validation and renewal, Vivian Elliott's malignancy was finally, conclusively extinguished by the twin fires of perseverance and love. She would always be a part of our shared histories. That much was undeniable. But her defeat and our dogged efforts to emerge unbowed from her cruelty's cauldron ensured that the last echoing remnants of that toxic matriarch's depravity had been forever exorcised. The Elliott's healing could truly begin at last.
I sat quietly beside the bed, watching Emily, my wife, as she rested. She was overdue, and each day seemed to stretch endlessly, a quiet anticipation hanging in the air. "Emily," I whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. She stirred, her eyes slowly opening. "How long have you been sitting there?" she asked, her voice tinged with sleep. "Long enough to remember why I fell in love with you," I replied, trying to infuse some lightness into the moment. She smiled, but it was shadowed with unease. I just wish Margaret would let us have these last few days to ourselves, she said, a hint of frustration in her tone. Margaret, my mother-in-law, had always been a thorn in our side, particularly for Emily. I had witnessed her harsh treatment and unkind words towards Emily over the years, each incident casting a long shadow over our lives. I spoke to her yesterday, I said, recalling the difficult conversation. Told her we needed space, especially with the baby coming. The midwife was clear about the stress being bad for both of you. Emily's expression tightened. And how did she take it? About as well as you'd expect. But I was firm. This time is about us, our new family. Her hand found mine, her grip tight. Thank you, she said, her eyes moist. I just can't handle her right now, not with the baby so close. I know, I reassured her, holding her hand firmly. I'll take care of it. We sat together, the unspoken history of Margaret's behavior between us. From demeaning comments to more overt acts of hostility, the impact on Emily was profound. But in that moment, with the gentle morning light around us, I felt a renewed determination. I was ready to protect Emily and our soon-to-be-born child, no matter what it took. As Emily fell back into a light sleep, my thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a car outside. Peering through the window, my heart sank at the sight of Margaret's car in the driveway. She had come uninvited, as was her habit. Taking a deep breath, I stood up. It was time to confront what lay ahead. As I descended the stairs to confront Margaret, my mind raced back through the years, replaying the myriad of ways she had inflicted pain upon Emily. It was like flipping through a dark photo album, each memory a snapshot of cruelty. Emily was 16 when I first met her. Even then, Margaret's shadow loomed large over her life. I remember a high school dance where Emily's hair had been roughly chopped off, an uneven bob that she tried to hide under a hat. Mom thought it would look better short, she had whispered to me, her eyes downcast. That was Margaret, always asserting control, even over Emily's appearance. The abuse wasn't just physical. It was the constant gaslighting, the relentless undermining of Emily's reality. Margaret, aided by David and Alex, would spin tales, weaving false narratives that left Emily questioning her own sanity. They were a united front against her, a family that seemed to relish in her confusion and pain. One particular incident stood out in my mind. It was a family dinner, a supposed celebration of Emily's promotion at work. Instead of congratulations, Margaret had spent the evening belittling Emily's achievements, comparing her unfavorably to Alex, the golden child. You might have a fancy job, but Alex has real skills, she had said, her words dripping with disdain. It was more than just words. There were the unannounced visits, the unwanted gifts that felt more like invasions, the blatant disrespect of our space and privacy. They would sneak into our house when we were out, going through our things, leaving a trail of discomfort and unease in their wake. Their treatment of Alex was a stark contrast. Nearly 40, he lived a life devoid of responsibility or consequences, his every need catered to by Margaret. He was a bully, both physically and verbally abusive, not just to Emily, but to his own parents. Yet, in Margaret's eyes, he could do no wrong. These memories fueled my resolve as I opened the front door. Margaret stood there, her expression one of feigned concern. "Margaret," I greeted her, my tone measured. "What brings you here today?" "I just wanted to see how Emily is doing. You know, with the baby coming and all," she said, her voice dripping with insincerity. "I've told you, Emily needs rest and space. Your visits are stressing her out." Margaret's face twisted into a scowl. "I'm her mother. I have every right to be here." "Not when your presence is harmful." "We've discussed this," I said, standing firm. She huffed, her eyes flashing with anger. "You're keeping me from my daughter and my grandchild." "I'm protecting my family, Margaret. That's my right." As she turned and stormed off, I knew this was far from over. But for now, I had drawn a line, one that I hoped would shield Emily and our child from the shadows of her family's past. The days following my confrontation with Margaret were tense, filled with a silence that was both welcome and foreboding. Emily, sensing the undercurrents, often asked if everything was all right. Each time I assured her it was, not wanting to add to her stress. But the truth was, things were far from all right. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the edge of something inevitable and potentially explosive. Margaret's visits had stopped, but her presence loomed like a dark cloud over our home. One afternoon, while Emily rested upstairs, I heard a knock at the door. Bracing myself for another round with Margaret, I was surprised to find David standing there, his eyes downcast. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, leading him into the living room. The tension was palpable as he sat down, his hands fidgeting in his lap. "It's about Alex," he began, his voice strained. "Margaret doesn't see it, but he's out of control." I listened, my heart heavy, as David recounted recent incidents of Alex's aggression. He spoke of unprovoked outbursts, of physical altercations that left both him and Margaret bruised and shaken. It was a side of Alex I had seen glimpses of, but never to this extent. "He needs help," David concluded, his eyes meeting mine. "But Margaret won't hear of it. She says we're imagining things, that Alex is just spirited." The revelation was jarring, yet not entirely surprising. The family's denial of Alex's behavior, their refusal to acknowledge the damage he caused, was a pattern long established. "I agree, he needs help," I said. "But if Margaret won't see it—" David nodded, a look of resignation on his face. "I just thought you should know, for Emily's sake." After he left, I sat alone, processing the conversation. The situation was more complex than I had realized. It wasn't just Margaret's treatment of Emily. It was the entire family dynamic, a toxic environment that enabled and excused Alex's behavior. I knew then that protecting Emily and our child meant more than just keeping Margaret at bay. It meant acknowledging the brokenness of her family, and perhaps accepting that some fractures were beyond repair. That night, as I lay beside Emily, her hand resting on her swollen belly, I felt a resolve harden within me. Whatever it took, I would shield them from the storm that was brewing, even if it meant cutting ties with a family that was drowning in its own dysfunction. In the days that followed the family gathering, Emily and I talked long into the nights, unraveling the years of manipulation and control exerted by her family. It was a painful process, each conversation unearthing more of the buried trauma she had endured. One evening, as we sat in the living room, Emily's phone buzzed with a message. It was from her cousin, someone we rarely heard from. The text was brief but jarring. "Heard what happened at the dinner. I'm sorry. You deserve better." This simple message from an unexpected source was like a small crack in a dam, and slowly the truth began to seep through. Over the next few days, more messages arrived, each one shedding light on the false narratives that Margaret and her family had spun about us. "We always wondered why you seemed so distant at family events," one read. "I heard your mom talking about how difficult you were, but it never added up," said another. Each message was a revelation, peeling back the layers of deceit we had been enmeshed in. It became increasingly clear that Margaret's influence extended far beyond what we had imagined, tainting our relationships and reputation within the wider family. The most damning revelation came from an unexpected source. David, in a rare moment of candor, confided in me about the extent of Alex's hold over the family. "He's threatened us, you know," David admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "If we don't do as he says, he becomes violent. We're afraid of him." This confession was a chilling insight into the dysfunction at the heart of Emily's family. Alex, enabled and protected by Margaret, had become a tyrant in his own home, his actions unchecked and excused. As these truths came to light, Emily's resolve hardened. "We can't be part of this anymore," she said one night, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "It's not just about us now, it's about our child. I won't let them grow up in the shadow of this madness." I held her close, my own emotions a tumult of anger, sadness, and protective fierceness. "We'll start anew," I promised. "We'll build our own family, free from all this." The decision to cut ties with her family was not an easy one for Emily, but it was necessary. We began the process of disentangling our lives from theirs, each step a move towards freedom and healing. As we prepared for the birth of our child, I felt a weight lifting from our shoulders. We were stepping out of the shadows into a future we would shape on our own terms. The day our child was born was a day of mixed emotions. As I held our baby for the first time, looking into those innocent eyes, I felt a surge of love and protectiveness unlike anything I had ever known. But lurking in the back of my mind was the knowledge of the confrontation that awaited us. Emily, exhausted but radiant, cradled our baby gently. "We did it," she whispered, her eyes shining with tears. "We have our family now." I nodded, my heart swelling with pride and love. But as we basked in the joy of our new arrival, I couldn't shake the feeling of impending conflict. Margaret had made it clear she expected to be a part of our child's life, but after everything, that was impossible. In the days that followed, as we adjusted to our new life, the reality of our situation became increasingly clear. Margaret's attempts to insert herself into our lives intensified. She called repeatedly, each message a mix of sweet talk and veiled threats. The final straw came one afternoon when we found a pile of gifts outside our door, all from Margaret. Among them was a note, "To my grandchild, who I will see, no matter what." That night, Emily and I sat down and made the decision. We would go completely no contact with her family. It was the only way to protect our child and ourselves from the cycle of abuse and manipulation. The process was painful, filled with legal consultations and emotional discussions. But with each step, I felt a sense of liberation, as if we were shedding the weight of years of oppression. As I watched Emily with our baby, her laughter free and unburdened, I knew we had made the right choice. We were starting anew, creating a family built on love, respect, and safety. Our journey was not without its challenges. There were moments of doubt, of fear that we had severed ties with the only family Emily had ever known. But in those moments, we found strength in each other and in the love we had for our child. We moved to a new home, a place untainted by the past. Here, in this space of our own making, we began to heal. Our child grew, surrounded by love and free from the shadows that had once loomed so large. In this new dawn, we found peace. We had stepped out of the darkness and into a future of our own choosing. Our family, though small, was a fortress against the turmoil we had left behind. As I looked at Emily and our child, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. We had weathered the storm, and in its wake, we had found something precious, a life of our own, filled with hope and endless possibilities.